What if we're already living what we've always feared to acknowledge? What if the signs aren't hidden, but we've become too accustomed to the darkness to perceive them? This question cuts through the silence like a blade, because it exposes exactly what no one wants to admit. Perhaps the end of times isn't a distant cinematic event, full of explosions and prophets shouting in the streets. Perhaps it's happening now, within the ordinary routine, in the details you ignore every day. The world doesn't collapse all at once. It begins with small cracks, strange behaviors, chaos that becomes landscape, conflicts that seem normal, news that once shocked and now you scroll through as if it were just another notification on the screen. That's how it all ends, not with a bang, but with a habit. What if what you call normality is just the silent prelude to judgment? There's a growing unease, even if you try to ignore it. A discomfort, a feeling that something is wrong, even when everything seems the same. Perhaps it's when you realize how the world has become too fast, too noisy, too empty. Perhaps it's when you see evil increasing, violence treated as entertainment, people's faith dissolving like smoke. This spiritual emptiness that dominates humanity, it's not a coincidence, it's a symptom. And what if this feeling you try to suppress, that something big is about to happen, is your own spirit alerting you that time is moving in a different way, accelerated, almost as if a countdown were running behind everything? You feel it. The audience feels it. People carry a fear of the unknown, a fear of losing control, a fear of waking up one day and realizing the world has changed forever. But at the same time, there is a deep desire, a desire to understand, to prepare, not to be caught off guard when the prophecies begin to align before our eyes. The pain is real. Insecurity, anxiety, saturation with chaos, the feeling that we are on the verge of something we cannot name. And the desire is also real, answers, clarity, direction, purpose. Deep down, everyone knows there is something bigger in motion. They just don't know how to interpret it. What if time isn't passing, but rather closing in? Imagine the world as a circle, not a line. Imagine each piece of news, each crisis, each moral rupture as a distant echo of something foretold thousands of years ago. Prophecies don't sleep. They wait. And when they arrive slowly, first as whispers, then as signs, then as reality. Perhaps that's why the sense of urgency never disappears. You try to distract yourself, try to pretend everything is all right, try to go on with your life as if nothing is happening. But the feeling returns, because it's not psychological, it's spiritual. What if climate change isn't just about climate? What if moral collapse isn't just sociological? What if the world's acceleration isn't just technological? What if all of this is part of a much larger alignment, something that transcends governments, wars, and algorithms, something that points to what we've always feared to confront? There is no greater pain than feeling that something is coming and not knowing what it is. And there is no stronger desire than discovering the truth before it knocks on the door. And maybe, just maybe, the end times are closer than we imagine. What if this video is exactly what you needed to hear to finally see what's changing right before your eyes? Even if the world pretends nothing is happening, let's continue. Because what comes next delves deeper into this point. Everything seems normal until it isn't anymore. That's the phrase that defines the world we're living in now. A world that seems stable on the surface, but which, underneath, already shows signs of pre-collapse, deep cracks that no one wants to admit. Except that you feel it. Your audience feels it. There's a tension in the air, a feeling that something is wrong, as if reality is about to break in two, even if the news pretends everything is normal. And it is in this paradox that the truth lies. Pre-collapse doesn't present itself with explosions, but with habits. It doesn't begin with total chaos, but with adaptation to chaos. And this adaptation, this slow normalization of the absurd, is the greatest sign that time is bending and that prophecies are beginning to breathe over the world again. People walk the streets as if everything is fine, but inside they carry unease, fear, anxiety. Violence becomes routine. Corruption becomes the landscape. Evil appears masked as freedom. Morality fragments like glass thrown on the floor, each piece reflecting a different opinion, belief, value, all disconnected, all misaligned, all without a center. The modern era has transformed right and wrong into an individual choice, a customizable product, and this moral relativism is the fertile ground where pre-collapse grows silently, like a weed. When everyone becomes their own truth, the world loses its axis, and collapse becomes inevitable. And that's exactly what's happening now. Humanity has lost the ability to discern. Violence no longer shocks. Children grow up watching destruction as entertainment. Adults consume tragedies as if they were episodes of a series. Evil becomes trendy. Pain becomes content. Suffering becomes a meme. The human heart hardens a little more day after day until what should hurt us simply doesn't hurt anymore. This is the most dangerous sign of all. When horror becomes commonplace, it ceases to be perceived as a warning, but it doesn't cease to be a warning. And when we talk about pre-collapse, we're not just talking about wars, pandemics, economic crises. We're talking about a spiritual and emotional erosion. It's the disconnection of the soul. It's the disappearing inner silence. It's the feeling of emptiness that dominates most people, even surrounded by technology, distraction, and comfort. Technology, in fact, has become the new Tower of Babel, a monument erected by humanity to achieve the impossible, but which, in practice, has amplified confusion, control, and disorientation. The excess of information steals discernment. The excess of screens steals sensitivity. The excess of speed steals depth. Uncontrolled technology creates a hyper-connected and, paradoxically, completely isolated world. You feel it. The audience feels it even more. We live in a generation where everyone is attentive, but no one is awake. Everyone is online, but no one is present. The human mind has become open territory for influence, manipulation, and noise. And amidst this noise, important things go unnoticed: spiritual signs, moral shifts, prophetic alignments. That's why everything seems normal until it isn't anymore, until something breaks, until unexpected news breaks, until an international crisis begins, until a global event changes everything again. Pre-collapse is like that. It feigns normality until the very last second. And people carry real pain within this scenario: fear of the future, fear of social collapse, fear of violence, fear of loneliness, fear of losing their own identity amidst the crowd. And at the same time, they carry deep desires. They want security, they want answers, they want to understand what is happening, they want to know how to prepare. Many feel that there is something spiritual behind this heavy atmosphere, but they don't know how to express it. Others perceive that the world is accelerating towards something inevitable, but they don't know if it's prophecy, consequence, or both. What if, deep down, all of this is a warning? What if the global pre-collapse is precisely the silent preparation for something to come? Something bigger, something that transcends politics, economics, and technology. What if this sense of urgency that people try to ignore is the first trumpet sounding not in the heavens, but within the human spirit? And now I want your opinion. I want to know if you feel this way too. Comment below if you perceive that the world is strange, or just comment with the word collapse. So I know you're here with me in this analysis, and if you believe we're living through the beginning of something prophetic, simply write, "I see the signs." There is something that no one sees but everyone feels. A clock that isn't hanging on the wall, doesn't appear on cell phones, doesn't appear on calendars, but it pulses, silently, relentlessly, profoundly. It is God's invisible clock. And even if the world tries to deny it, even if humanity pretends not to notice, the truth is that this clock is ticking, not according to our notion of time, but according to divine chronology. And it is precisely here that everything becomes unsettling. When God's time begins to touch the time of men, the feeling that arises is none other than the one you have probably been carrying in your heart for months, perhaps years. The feeling that time is running out. It's not about fixed dates, it's not about human theories, it's not about empty predictions. It's about something deeper, the realignment of ancient prophecies with the present. The Bible never used time as we do, days, weeks, months, schedules. God's time is cyclical, alive, spiritual, based on movement, not numbers. And when those movements begin to align again, the whole world feels it, even without understanding. Divine chronology doesn't err, it simply waits. And when it moves everything around it. That's why so many people today have this constant, almost suffocating sense of urgency. It's as if something is squeezing the air, bringing events closer, accelerating processes. Life is faster. Events are more intense, crises are more frequent, nothing slows down, nothing returns to normal. And why does this happen? Because when God's invisible clock begins to mark the prophetic hour, human history begins to move at the pace of prophecy, not convenience. And this pace is always faster, more intense, and more decisive. The truth is simple. Human chronology is comfortable, flexible, full of adaptations. Divine chronology is not. It is precise. It is absolute. It is like a line that leads everything to a point established since eternity. And that point in spiritual eyes is closer now than it has been in any other modern period. The prophecies are not dormant. They are falling into place, like pieces that remained separated for centuries, and now, one by one, begin to come together before our eyes. Events that once seemed isolated now form patterns. Moral changes, geopolitical changes, spiritual changes. Everything converges. Everything points. Everything pulsates, as if a great cycle were coming to an end. And that's exactly what so many feel, even without being able to explain it. That feeling that something is coming. That sudden unease when you see certain news. That shiver when you realize that the world is moving in directions already described thousands of years ago. That spiritual discomfort when you realize that what seemed distant is now touching our generation. The feeling of time running out is not anxiety, it's discernment. It's the spirit recognizing spiritual movements that the mind tries to deny. God's invisible clock doesn't use seconds, it uses signs. And each sign is like a trumpet blast, even if no one perceives the sound. Global events cease to be coincidences and become connections. Every crisis is a gear turning. Every moral collapse is a pointer moving forward. Every social rupture, every instability, every sudden transformation, everything is part of this invisible mechanism that leads the world not to final chaos, but to final revelation. And those with spiritual eyes perceive it. Those with sensitivity know it. Something is moving, and it is greater than governments, greater than systems, greater than any human agenda. Divine chronology has always been fulfilled perfectly, always. No prophecy has been left unfinished. No word has gone unanswered. And now, at this very moment, history is repeating what has already been experienced in ancient cycles, but on a much larger, much faster, and more global scale. And that's what makes everything so intense. God's invisible clock doesn't speed up, but we do. And when our lives accelerate to the point of colliding with spiritual time, exactly what you are seeing happens. Restlessness, confusion, a sense of urgency, a perception that something is wrong, and at the same time, an instinctive certainty that something big is about to be revealed. Think about it. Why are so many people around the world feeling the same thing at the same time? Why are so many having nightmares, visions, premonitions, strange emotions, unexplained discomforts? Why are so many people returning to spirituality, seeking profound answers, reflecting on the end times? This isn't a fad, this is synchronization. When God's clock moves forward, the human spirit reacts, even without understanding why. It's as if the soul knows before the body. And if you're hearing this now, it's no coincidence. You're part of this generation that perceives the alignment happening. That unease that accompanies you when you see news of wars, crises, scandals, collapses. That emptiness that invades you when you realize the world is losing its sense of morality. That feeling that the planet is heavy, burdened, spiritually saturated. All of this is echoing the clock. Each invisible tick-tock is a call. A silent reminder that history is approaching a critical prophetic point. The prophecies that awaken from the dust begin to move as if someone had breathed life into ancient pages, and it's impossible to ignore the feeling that something is being released into the air, something that was once dormant, buried under centuries of human interpretation, but which now pulsates, breathes, reacts. And when these prophecies begin to rise, the spiritual atmosphere changes. Daniel is no longer just an old book kept on a shelf. Revelation is no longer just a collection of mysterious metaphors. Christ's eschatological discourses no longer sound like distant words spoken to people of another era. Suddenly, all of this seems to speak directly to the now, to this very moment, to the era in which you are living. This is progressive revelation, and when it happens, nothing remains the same. It's striking how Daniel describes visions he himself didn't understand, as if he were writing for people yet unborn, for times that were still unformed. He confesses this. Some revelations were sealed, closed, locked away for the end times. And when something is sealed, no matter how many try to interpret it before its time, it doesn't open. And it's precisely this idea that is unsettling. What if we are living in the period when these things are finally beginning to open up? What if the contemporary world is the stage for what Daniel could only see from afar, trembling? What happens when what was sealed begins to awaken? Do you feel it? This sensation that lines written thousands of years ago are now fitting together like pieces of a puzzle that could only be assembled when humanity reached this level of chaos, technology, speed, and moral rupture. And when you look at Revelation, you realize that the entire book vibrates like something alive, almost as if it had been planted like a prophetic seed, waiting for the exact season to germinate. It speaks of systems, of powers, of control structures, of global movements that would only become possible in a completely connected era. And the most unsettling thing is that none of this is emerging as something extraordinary or supernatural in human eyes. Everything appears as progress, as modernity, as evolution. But those who read with discernment know there is an architecture behind the visible. There is a spiritual shadow moving alongside the political, technological, and social landscape. And when Revelation begins to fit details with the current scenario, the question ceases to be, will it happen, and becomes, has it already begun? And that is the question that burns in the minds of many people, even if they don't say it aloud. Christ's eschatological discourses, however, carry a different weight. They are not visions, they are not symbolism, they are direct warnings, almost like an urgent alert, delivered with the honesty of someone who knows what is to come. He speaks of nation against nation, kingdom against kingdom, rumors of war, signs in the sky, movements on earth, climate change, social upheavals, spiritual persecutions, deception spreading like toxic smoke. And it is impossible to look at all this and simply ignore it. The feeling is the same as hearing someone knocking at the door. You may try not to pay attention, but the sound continues, insistent, until it becomes impossible to deny. And now, when these three vectors, Daniel, Revelation, and the words of Christ, begin to converge, not in a mystical or exaggerated way, but in a logical, natural, contextual way, something within the human spirit awakens. It's not fear, it's perception. It's that silent shock of understanding that perhaps you are living exactly between the lines they wrote, as if the world were finally giving language to what previously seemed abstract. After all, many of the things that were incomprehensible to past generations, such as the possibility of global surveillance, digital control, mass manipulation, simultaneous collapses, interconnected financial systems, the fusion of politics with technology, are now not only possible, but already exist. And this raises a red flag for anyone who reads prophecies sincerely. But the most intriguing point is that of celestial signs. Because celestial signs have never been merely beautiful astronomical phenomena, they have always been spiritual indicators, divine markers, as if the sky were a great canvas where God draws messages for those who have eyes to see. And today, in a time when we are increasingly accustomed to looking at screens instead of looking at the sky, these signs seem to have become even more intense, almost as if they wanted to grab our attention at all costs. It's no coincidence. Nothing in the spiritual realm is a coincidence. Everything fits into a larger narrative, a narrative that spans eras, empires, civilizations, and reaches us, demanding attention, discernment, and vigilance. This awakening of prophecies doesn't happen like a sudden thunderclap. It happens like a gradual lighting, like a dawn that slowly pushes away the shadows until the moment when no one can deny what is being revealed. And those who are attentive realize that we are in this dawn. The prophecies are rising from the dust because their time has come, and when they rise, the world trembles. When they breathe, human systems shudder. When they speak, history obeys. And that's why the feeling of time is running out intensifies, not as panic, not as despair, but as a silent warning in the heart, like that thought that arises out of nowhere. All this is not by chance, like that sudden realization. We are living something bigger than we imagined. Like that chill down the spine when something spiritual touches the surface of reality. Now tell me, are you noticing this awakening? Are you seeing this convergence? Comment, I'm seeing this happening if this feeling resonates with you. Or comment, I want to understand more. Your perception matters because this topic needs to reach more people. Also comment if you want me to delve deeper into Daniel, Revelation, or the teachings of Christ. I want to see how many people are truly reading the signs. The man facing spiritual chaos is not the image of someone running desperately, but the figure of someone who seems calm on the outside while, inside, a silent battle is being fought every day. And this battle is not against visible enemies, not against obvious dangers, not against external threats. It is an internal war, a silent war, a war that almost no one admits to fighting. And for that very reason, it is the most dangerous. Because it grows hidden, strengthens in the shadows of routine, and feeds precisely on what seems most harmless, modern illusions. Those ideas that say, everything's normal, everything's fine, life goes on, there's no need to think about that now. It is this manufactured normality that anesthetizes the soul and pushes millions of people into a state of silent apostasy, where faith doesn't die suddenly. It falls asleep slowly, without the person realizing it. And that is exactly what is happening today. Spiritual chaos disguises itself as peace, deviation presents itself as evolution, disconnection from God dresses itself in freedom. Modern apostasy is no longer that open, direct, aggressive rebellion. Now it is subtle, light, comfortable. It happens when someone exchanges the sacred for the useful, when they exchange the eternal for the immediate, when they exchange the spiritual for the emotional, when they exchange discernment for opinion, when they exchange holiness for convenience. All this seems normal, seems logical, even seems healthy. But it is precisely this gentleness that transforms contemporary apostasy into one of the greatest spiritual traps of our generation. And the strangest thing is that modern man, even surrounded by so much technology, information, speed and stimuli, feels an emptiness he cannot explain. He tries to fill it with entertainment, with excesses, with distractions, with endless routines, with new desires, with artificial paradises that last only a few hours. But none of these substitute fillings heals the soul. On the contrary, they only further widen the gap between mind and spirit, creating a kind of constant noise that prevents the person from hearing their own conscience, much less the voice of God. This is the perfect scenario for dormant faith. A faith that has not died, but is so muffled, so buried by the noise of life, that it can hardly breathe anymore. And when faith slumbers, discernment weakens. And when discernment weakens, a person begins to accept anything as truth. They begin to normalize what previously bothered them. They begin to tolerate what previously alerted them. They begin to ignore signs that would have previously made their spirit tremble. This is how spiritual chaos takes hold, not as an explosion, but as slow erosion, not as an earthquake, but as infiltration, not as an attack, but as a whisper. And when spiritual erosion reaches identity, man begins to lose himself within himself. That is when the internal confrontation arises, not that enormous and explicit confrontation, but a silent tension between fear and truth. Fear wants to protect comfort. Fear wants to keep everything as it is. Fear says, don't ask, don't investigate, don't awaken. Fear hates light because it knows that when the light arrives, the person needs to change. And change hurts. That's why fear always tries to keep man spiritually asleep. But the truth does the opposite. The truth disturbs, the truth provokes, the truth awakens, the truth reveals, the truth tears off masks and exposes wounds. The truth is that ray of light that pierces the darkness and shows everything that was hidden. And that is exactly what causes man's internal confrontation with spiritual chaos. He feels the truth calling, pulling, igniting something within him. But at the same time, he feels fear trying to paralyze him, trying to convince him that it's better not to mess with it. And this conflict intensifies the moment he realizes something is wrong, but he can't name it. It's as if he looks at the world and says, something strange is happening, but is ashamed to admit it aloud. He realizes that violence is normalized, that morality is fragmented, that the spiritual has become a meme, that evil has become entertainment, that the sacred has become a joke. He perceives all of this, but at the same time he feels that emotional impulse saying, don't complicate things. But the spirit doesn't remain silent, and the more the person tries to ignore it, the more the discomfort grows. This is the exact point where millions find themselves today, between fear and truth, between routine and awakening, between silent apostasy and confrontation with God, between dormant faith and the call to awaken, and spiritual chaos only becomes powerful when a person ignores this internal conflict. Because when they ignore it, they revert to autopilot. They return to the cycle. They return to anesthesia. But when they pay attention to this discomfort, this inner echo, this feeling that something bigger is happening, That's when everything begins to change. That's when a light invades the chaos. And this light doesn't come from human strength. It doesn't come from modern philosophy. It doesn't come from self-help. It doesn't come from superficial motivation. This light comes from truth. And truth, when it finds someone who still has a minimum of sensitivity, explodes like a flash within the soul. A flash that exposes spiritual chaos and shows that life is not only what the eyes see, that there is spiritual warfare happening all the time. That there is purpose, warning, discernment, destiny, eternity. But modern man, distracted by the illusions of progress and autonomy, has become blind to these invisible realities. And this spiritual blindness is the root of silent apostasy. But now, faced with moral collapse, the acceleration of prophecies, and the awakening of God's invisible clock, this blindness is being confronted. Something is nudging the human soul, calling, disturbing, awakening. And spiritual chaos can no longer hide because the world environment is exposing everything. People are feeling a weight they cannot explain. The feeling that the world is different. The feeling that something is coming. The feeling that time is strange. All of these are spiritual signs pressing the human spirit to awaken. The unseen war is precisely the most dangerous because it doesn't explode before our eyes. It doesn't scream. It doesn't invade the headlines. It doesn't appear in viral videos. It happens in the underground of human existence, in the cracks of routine, in the subtext of thoughts, in the empty spaces of the soul. And the most frightening thing is that this battle is not new. It has always existed. It has always been there, hidden in the invisible fold between the physical world and the spiritual world. What has changed is not the war itself. What has changed is our ability to perceive it. Because today, more than ever, darkness does not advance with explicit violence. It advances subtly. And that is exactly what makes this moment so dangerous, the normalization of the invisible. The spiritual battle has become silent because distraction has become the enemy's most effective weapon. It's not necessary to destroy someone who lives scattered. It's not necessary to directly attack someone who lives spiritually disconnected. It's enough to keep them busy. It's enough to keep their minds saturated. It's enough to fill their hearts with instant desires, their time with meaningless tasks, their lives with noises that prevent the spirit from breathing. That's why so many live tired without knowing why. That's why so many feel an invisible weight, an exhaustion that doesn't come from the body, but from the soul. That's why millions are living today as if they were inside a dense fog, where everything seems normal, but nothing is truly clear. And this fog isn't just emotional, psychological, or social. It's spiritual. It's as if something is gradually blinding the human spirit, a silent blackout that robs sensitivity to the sacred. And the person doesn't even realize it. They just go on with life, thinking everything is fine, when in reality they are walking on a battlefield completely unarmed. That's what makes this war so brutal. Most soldiers don't even know they're fighting. They are distracted by the physical world, while in the spiritual world, forces of darkness move with more freedom than ever before. And understand this: subtlety is the strategy. Darkness doesn't want to scare, it wants to seduce. It doesn't want to reveal its presence, it wants to camouflage itself in things that seem harmless. Distraction doesn't come saying, "I am a spiritual weapon." It arrives saying, "Just one more video, just one more notification, just one more desire, just one more pleasure, just one more shortcut." And so, little by little, the person's spirit becomes opaque. It loses its shine. It loses focus. You lose the connection. And when the connection with the spiritual weakens, discernment weakens along with it. It is at this point that the war becomes even more intense, because when discernment falters, a person begins to leave doors open without realizing it. Doubt enters. Anxiety enters, fear enters, confusion enters, spiritual weakness enters, and all of this seems like just modern life, ordinary routine, normal tiredness. But on a spiritual level, it's much more than that. It's an enemy advance. It's territory being taken. It's a shadow spreading over areas of life that were once illuminated, and because the person doesn't recognize the spiritual origin of it, they try to resolve with human strength what can only be resolved with divine strength. And this creates more strain because she struggles alone. She tries to overcome thoughts that aren't just mental. She tries to overcome anxieties that aren't just psychological. She tries to overcome fears that aren't just emotional. And the more she tries to resolve in the natural realm what belongs to the spiritual, the more she sinks. The smaller, weaker, and more incapable she feels, the more she loses sight of the whole picture. And it is precisely there that spiritual paranoia begins to emerge, not in a negative sense, but in the sense of perceiving that there is something behind the visible layers. That feeling that there is an attack that cannot be explained. That perception that life has entered a strange, heavy, burdened territory, and little by little the person notices signs, small but repetitive, lack of peace in moments that should be tranquil, emotional exhaustion that appears for no reason, pains that seem deeper than they appear, thoughts that don't match the person's identity, feelings of oppression that arise out of nowhere. This is not random, this is not a coincidence, this is an attack, this is spiritual warfare. This is the advance of darkness. But as always, the war is silent, and because it is silent, many ignore it. They pretend they didn't see it, they pretend they didn't feel it. They try to rationalize it, but the Spirit knows. The Spirit always knows. Even when the mind tries to explain everything logically, the Spirit senses the movement in the invisible. It senses that something greater is happening. It senses that there is a strange weight hanging over the world. It senses that something is pressing, accelerating, tightening. It's as if the spiritual atmosphere were charged, as if the air were denser, as if the light were struggling to pierce through an ever-thickening layer of darkness. And this is happening on a global scale, not just individually, because darkness has become strategic. It doesn't just attack individuals, it attacks cultures, values, identities, families, nations. Spiritual warfare has become systemic. And distraction remains the primary weapon, because a distracted world is a vulnerable world. A world that lives on autopilot is an easy world to manipulate. A world saturated with stimuli is a world blind to what truly matters. And the more people are distracted, the more darkness advances. That's why so many are feeling this sense of something is wrong, because it is, on levels that go far beyond the surface. And here's the part that few understand. This invisible war isn't one with force, it's one with spiritual clarity. You need to see in order to resist. And that's exactly what the enemy tries to prevent. That you see, that you perceive, that you wake up. Because spiritual awakening is the greatest act of war against darkness. When someone awakens, distraction loses power, fear loses strength, lies lose ground, the shadow recedes, spiritual chaos splits, the inner environment changes. The surrounding atmosphere changes, the person changes, and when one person awakens, others follow the same path, because discernment is contagious. Therefore, I want you to think about what's happening around you. Do you feel this war? Do you feel this invisible weight? Do you feel that even without seeing it, there's something spiritual trying to distance you from what matters? Comment below if this resonates with you. Comment, I see the war, or I want spiritual discernment. These comments help me know if you're connected to this message and also strengthen the video to reach more people who are experiencing exactly this scenario. The divine paradox has always been the most uncomfortable part of faith because it doesn't fit into our human logic. We learn from an early age to see God as love, and He is. But few have the courage to face the other side of the truth. The God who loves is the same God who judges. The God who welcomes also corrects. The God who consoles also confronts, and it is in this divine ambiguity that what many call mystery resides, but which in truth is the foundation of spiritual justice. Because there is no true love without responsibility, just as there is no true justice without mercy. And when you understand this, everything begins to make sense. But the modern world doesn't understand this balance. And the reason is simple. We live in an era that idolizes the idea of emotional comfort. A generation that runs from any truth that provokes change. They want a God who only soothes, not a God who transforms. They want a God who only says yes, but never a God who says stop. They want mercy without consequence, grace without repentance, promise without renunciation. And because of this, many have completely lost sight of what divine justice truly means. Because God's justice is not vengeance, but protection. God's judgment is not destruction, but restoration. He judges not to annihilate, but to prevent darkness from taking what belongs to the light. And this is the point that few people realize. Divine mercy is always present before judgment. God always warns before correcting. He always sends signs, awakens the spirit, stirs the heart, opens paths of return. He never casts someone into judgment without first offering a chance for restoration. This is the paradox. Judgment is, in itself, a form of mercy. Because without judgment, evil would become eternal. Without judgment, injustice would become law. Without judgment, chaos would reign forever. And that is why judgment exists, not out of cruelty, but out of love. Love for order, love for truth, love for light, love for those who still wish to remain steadfast. But there's a detail that makes everything even more profound. Divine mercy is not passive. It's not just a kind feeling. It acts, it moves circumstances, it interrupts paths. It creates obstacles to prevent future destruction. Sometimes, what seems like a blow in our lives is actually a detour that prevents us from falling into greater ruin. Sometimes, God's silence is precisely the moment when He is rearranging everything so that judgment doesn't fall on us, but on that which was trying to destroy us. How many times has something stuck you in life, and you interpreted it as a loss, when in fact it was deliverance? This kind of perception only arises when we understand the divine paradox. God cares and corrects at the same time. And this balance also appears in the scriptures, always. When God warned a people, it was mercy. When He sent prophets, it was mercy. When He brought judgment, it was mercy to preserve what was still right. And notice how well this fits into humanity's current moment. We are living through a point of spiritual transition where God continues to warn. He shows signs, He awakens people, He disturbs consciences, He exposes corruption, He reveals hidden darkness, He allows discomfort, unrest, moral upheaval, not as punishment but as a calling, as if He was saying, time is running out, look, wake up, choose. And yet many insist on ignoring it. And it is here that judgment begins to become inevitable. Because God is long-suffering, but not permissive. He waits, but not eternally. He grants time, but not infinite time. Because allowing evil to expand without limit would also be injustice. And divine justice is too perfect to tolerate eternally unpunished darkness. So a point comes when love needs to act firmly. Like a father protecting a child from something he himself cannot see. Like someone who says, "That's enough. Now it's over." This is the side of divine justice that many try to soften, but which in truth is profoundly necessary, because judgment is not violence. It is limit. It is not anger. It is order. It is not destruction. It is cleansing. Just like fire that purifies gold while destroying impurities. Just like pruning that cuts branches to save the whole tree. Just like surgery that wounds to heal. Just like the strong wind that sweeps away rotten leaves so that new ones can grow. Divine justice always has a purpose, and it is in this purpose that mercy dwells. The one who judges is the same one who loves. The one who saves is the same one who confronts. The one who exhorts is the same one who restores. And when a human being understands this, everything changes. The relationship with God ceases to be childish and becomes mature. Faith ceases to be fragile and becomes strong. Because the person begins to understand that God is not an indulgent figure who ignores everything to avoid conflict, but a just king who governs with perfection, a father who protects with authority, a creator who knows the beginning and the end, and who therefore acts on a timeline that only he sees completely. He sees what you don't see. He knows what you don't know. He prevents things you would never know how to avoid. And he corrects areas of your life that you didn't even know were destroying you from the inside. When this understanding takes hold, healthy awe is born. Not paralyzing fear, but reverence. The recognition that there is a God who not only loves, but governs, who not only comforts, but guides, who not only embraces, but disciplines. And this discipline is not coldness, it is care. Because God disciplines children, not enemies. He corrects those he loves. He molds those he chooses. He raises up those he wants to strengthen. And it is at this point that divine ambiguity becomes fascinating. You realize that God doesn't fit into human boxes. He is greater. He is deeper. He is more complex than any simplistic definition, and this should generate not confusion, but admiration. Because in the end, everything he does, whether mercy or judgment, converges on a single purpose, to restore what the world has tried to destroy. From the moment the world crosses an invisible point, almost imperceptible to distracted eyes, but brutally clear to those who still see with spiritual discernment, something changes in the human atmosphere. It's not just behavior, it's not just culture, it's not just politics or technology, it's a profound, silent but devastating shift. It's as if humanity has reached out and touched a line that should never be crossed. A moral, spiritual and prophetic limit that for centuries had been warned about, announced, repeated, ignored, until it was finally violated with frightening naturalness. And the most shocking thing is that no one perceives the exact moment of this crossing, because the point of no return doesn't arrive with sirens, it arrives with comfort. It doesn't come with noise, it comes with normality. It is not announced by immediate chaos, but by the slow adaptation of the human heart to a pattern increasingly distant from the light. This is how the countdown begins, not in the heavens, but within the spirit. And perhaps that's the most dangerous detail. When deviation ceases to seem like deviation, when error ceases to shock, when what once disturbed now amuses, when sin stops frightening and starts entertaining, when what was prophetic becomes a joke, when what was a warning becomes a meme, when what was a sign becomes routine. It is precisely at this point that the clock changes and humanity enters a road with no easy return, because it's not just a path away from truth. It's a path where the heart loses its sensitivity, where the conscience is cauterized, where the soul becomes accustomed to darkness. It's an internal change, and therefore much more difficult to reverse. The point of no return is spiritual before it is historical, moral before it is social, prophetic before it is visible. It is the moment when the world surpasses not God's limit, but its own. And when that happens, you start noticing signs that previously seemed disconnected, but now form a clear pattern. The inversion of values ceases to be an exception and becomes public policy. True spirituality is replaced by a performative, comfortable, negotiable spirituality. Prophecies cease to frighten and become content. Evil becomes a concept, blasphemy becomes a trend, violence becomes entertainment, lies become narrative. And while this is happening, humanity walks on as if nothing is happening, as if all this were just another chapter in human evolution, when in fact it is the prelude to something much bigger. Because whenever humanity crosses a moral boundary, something in the spiritual world becomes misaligned. And when it crosses a spiritual boundary, something in the physical world inevitably responds. There is no escaping this mechanism. It has always existed, always operated, always repeated itself throughout biblical and human history. And here's the detail that almost no one notices. The point of no return isn't just the moment when the world gets worse. It's the moment when humanity stops fighting against that worsening, stops resisting, stops feeling discomfort, stops seeking the light. It's the moment when the human spirit gives up, relaxes, surrenders, normalizes. That's why this phase of humanity is so critical, because the struggle isn't disappearing, it's being forgotten. Discernment isn't being threatened, it's being silenced. Faith isn't being forbidden, it's being put to sleep. It's an internal collapse, not an external one. And when the collapse comes from within, rescue is much more difficult, because no one can save someone who thinks everything is fine. And if you observe carefully, you will notice a prophetic pattern repeating itself. Every time man crosses a spiritual boundary, what has always been divine tolerance begins to transform into a divine response. Not as punishment, but as justice. Not out of anger, but as correction. It's as if God were saying, you have gone too far, not because you fell, but because you stopped trying to get up. And it is at this moment that we begin to see social ruptures, moral fissures, spiritual storms. Not because God abandons man, but because man abandons the convergence between mercy and conscience. And when conscience is abandoned, judgment does not come as a surprise, it comes as a consequence. And perhaps the most urgent question of all is, how do we know if we have already crossed that point of no return? The answer is simple. Observe spiritual sensitivity, not of the world, but of the individual. When the world normalizes what it destroys, you know the line has been crossed. When humanity begins to reject correction, reject limits, reject purpose, reject light, then the point is no longer in the future, it is in the now. And it is precisely this perception that generates the feeling of a countdown, not out of fear of the end, but because each new collective choice reinforces the irreversible course. It's like watching humanity slowly press a button that shouldn't exist, not out of ignorance, but out of arrogance. And this spiritual arrogance is the true marker of the crossing. What's most disturbing is that all of this happens so subtly that most people don't even realize they're participating. They just follow, accept, consume, repeat. It's a simultaneous cultural, social, and spiritual movement. It's as if a shadow is spreading, not violently, but like a mist that envelops everything without haste, without noise, without foreboding. A mist that confuses perceptions, distorts morals, relativizes principles, and weakens resistance. It's no wonder that so many feel an inexplicable weight, an inner fatigue, an anxiety without a diagnosis. Because when the spiritual collapses, the emotional follows. And when the emotional cracks, the physical becomes vulnerable. It's all connected, all interconnected. Nothing happens by chance. And as we move through this atmosphere, the feeling of a countdown becomes more palpable. Not as panic, but as certainty. Not as despair, but as lucidity. It is spiritual awareness saying, we are seeing signs that cannot be ignored. It is the perception that if the world continues at this pace, it may reach a point where turning back will no longer be an option. And this perception awakens an urgent call in the spirit of those who can still feel. A call to remain alert. A call not to surrender to the normalization of the absurd. A call to keep faith awake even when everything around seems asleep. If you sense this feeling in the air, comment below, "I feel the countdown." Or if you prefer, just comment, "Awakening." I want to see how many here still feel, how many still see what's really happening. It is precisely here, at this point where the world seems to have crossed an invisible border, that something emerges that almost no one expects. An interval, a spiritual interval, a subtle pause between chaos and consequence. A breach that shouldn't exist but does because mercy still persists, and this is what many ignore. Before the final silence, before the complete closing of the doors, before the world enters a stage where nothing can be reversed, there is one last chance. Not a comfortable chance, not a long chance, not an obvious chance, but a real chance. An opportunity for repentance, for awakening, for possible restoration. An opportunity that comes disguised behind warnings, discomforts, spiritual anxieties that many try to stifle, but which continue to echo within those who still feel them. And perhaps you've already noticed this. Despite the growing chaos, despite the spiritual coldness, despite the almost palpable countdown, there is a calling. Not a spectacular calling, not a vision that tears across the sky, but a whisper, a discomfort that visits you at night. An unease that appears in the middle of a routine you no longer question, a feeling that something inside you is being pulled back, as if there were an invisible string connecting your spirit to what you tried to forget. This is the last chance before the silence, the final invitation to awaken while there is still time. And that is exactly what the spiritual world does when the clock is almost at its limit. It leaves a remnant of light on, not to accompany you, but to guide you back. Because restoration is still possible, but it doesn't come through spectacle. It comes through awareness. It comes through recognizing that you've drifted away, that your spirit has fallen asleep, that your faith has been swallowed up by modern distractions. And that's precisely why so many people feel this inner tightness, this kind of mixture of fear and hope. Fear for what's to come, hope for what can still be changed. This contrast isn't psychological, it's spiritual. It's the spirit being shaken before entering an irreversible silence. It's as if heaven were saying, "Feel this. Don't ignore it," even when everything around you tries to convince you that nothing is happening. And the most powerful thing is that this calling isn't just collective, it's individual. It finds you in your daily life, provokes you amidst your distractions, confronts you in your silences, nudges you when you try to convince yourself that everything is all right. This last chance is profoundly personal because true restoration doesn't happen in the crowd. It happens within. Humanity may be crossing boundaries, but you don't have to cross them too. The world may be moving away from the truth, but you can still turn towards it. And this simple inner movement, this spiritual inclination, is already a sign that you are still alive inside, that the light within you hasn't completely gone out. It's just muffled by the layers of daily life, by the rush, by fear, by guilt, by indifference, but it hasn't gone out. And this is where the great tension comes in. Time is short, but the chance still exists. Chaos is advancing, but restoration is still offered. Humanity is heading towards silence, but God is still speaking. He speaks through signs, through discomfort, through spiritual anguish, through repetitions you can't explain. Every time something inside you alerts you, touches you, bothers you, displaces you, that's part of this last chance. Because before the silence comes, before the whole world enters that period where shouting is no longer effective, There is a gentle, insistent and profound call, and this call points you not to fear, but to hope. And not to an illusory hope, but to a hope built on the real possibility of change. The possible restoration isn't about perfection, it's about return. It's not about cleaning up all the mess, it's about acknowledging that it exists. It's not about becoming someone extraordinary, it's about accepting that you were created for something greater than spiritual apathy. This last chance is precisely that. A return of the spirit to its center, a reconnection with what you tried to ignore for so long, a rapprochement with the truth you felt from an early age, but lost amidst distractions. Because distraction is the greatest enemy at this moment. While darkness advances subtly, while the world races towards a point of no return, distraction acts as an anesthetic for the spirit. It keeps you too busy to realize you're being called. And that's why so many people miss the opportunity, not because they reject it, but because they don't perceive it. And here's something powerful. The greatest tragedy isn't Judgment Day arriving. The greatest tragedy is not waking up when there was still time. It's ignoring the call, not because you wanted to, but because you were too numb to hear. Humanity is surrounded by distractions, seductions, emotional anesthetics that steal spiritual sensitivity. But those who still feel, those who still perceive, those who are still touched by this discomfort, that is the most precious sign of all. It means you're still in the "you can come back" zone, that you haven't yet entered the silence, that your spirit still reacts, that your soul still recognizes the voice that calls you. And understand, awakening doesn't mean understanding everything. Awakening means admitting you were asleep. Repentance isn't humiliation, it's realignment. It's the soul saying, I got lost, but I want to return. And that's exactly what this last chance offers, the possibility of return before silence covers everything, before the prophetic clock ticks to a point where there's no more room for reconsideration. Before the world enters a phase where chaos stops warning and starts executing, before the time for reflection ends and the time for consequences begins. And perhaps that's why you're listening to this now. Perhaps it's not a coincidence. Perhaps this is part of that opening, that last spiritual window that opens for those who still have the sensitivity to listen. And if this is affecting you, if something inside you is being stirred, if this sense of urgency finds you while you listen to me, then it's because this last chance is still active, it's still available, it's still open. This is where everything narrows down. Here, where breathing becomes a little heavier, where any explanation seems insufficient, where the mind tries to process what the spirit understood long ago. After everything that has been said, after every sign exposed, after every truth whispered amidst the chaos, only one thing remains: the question. Not an ordinary question, not an intellectual question, not a theological question, but the question that haunts, the question that leaves no one unchanged, the question that doesn't shut up even when you try, the question that keeps echoing in the most sensitive point of your soul, like a reminder that you can't push it off until tomorrow. Because now, we're no longer talking about the world out there, about prophecies being fulfilled before your eyes, about technology spiraling out of control, about collapsing morals, about multiplying global chaos. Now it's not about collective signs. Now it's about you, about your destiny, about what is being written inside you as you breathe. And that's too powerful to ignore. Because in the end, the prophetic scenario doesn't just happen in the world. It happens inside each person, in an invisible space where no one sees, but where everything matters. And that's why the final question isn't, when will the end come? It's something else. It's much deeper. It's personal. It's inevitable. What if the end isn't coming, but has already begun within you? Think about it calmly. Feel this question. Because it doesn't speak of fear, it speaks of inner revelation. It speaks of that moment when your soul realizes it's not asleep by chance. It speaks of that instant when your consciousness awakens, even if your mind tries to rationalize. It's that subtle, almost imperceptible point where you realize something has changed inside, that there's a different weight, an expanded perception, a spiritual sensitivity you didn't have or that was stifled. This question exposes what many people try to avoid, that the end times is not just an external event, it's an inner calling. It's a profound awakening. It's a silent separation happening within each person, between truth and illusion, between light and shadow, between purpose and distraction. Because destiny is not a distant line. Destiny is an inner movement. And when you feel that movement, when your spirit stirs, when eternity touches your innermost being, it's not accidental. It's a sign that something has begun within you, a sign that spiritual time is advancing in your heart, in your discernment, in your life. And when that happens, everything changes. Perception changes, urgency changes, priorities change. Suddenly, things that were enormous lose their meaning. Things that were small become immense. It's as if a curtain has been pulled back, revealing a truth that has always been there, but that you are only now seeing. And this truth is simple. You are already living your eternity. Not when you die, not when the world collapses, not when the signs are undeniable, but now. Because eternity doesn't begin at the end, it begins within. It is built every day through the silent choices that no one sees. It is shaped when you decide to follow the truth and not comfort, when you choose to awaken instead of falling asleep, when you realize that there is something greater calling you, bothering you, pulling you. And this realization is crucial because it places you before the inevitable choice to continue ignoring this inner movement, or to finally face what is being born within you. And here's the most profound point. When the question echoes, what if the end has already begun within you? It doesn't speak of destruction, it speaks of transition. It speaks of the end of an inner era, the end of indifference, the end of spiritual dormancy, the end of self-deception, the end of escape, the end of masks. It speaks of the moment when your soul begins to move in the right direction, even if your mind doesn't yet know how to process it. It speaks of something that is being born, not just ending, and that is too powerful to be ignored. Many people think of the end as something frightening, something that brings fear, loss, despair. But the true end, the end that matters, is the end of what separates you from the truth. It's the end of everything that kept you away from your purpose. It's the end of the distractions that numbed you. It's the end of the illusion that you still have infinite time to align yourself spiritually. This end, this rupture, this inner turning point, that's what really matters. Because when this end begins within you, something new also begins, something that cannot be explained with ordinary words, something that only those who feel it understand. And this understanding, this profound perception, is what changes your destiny. Because destiny is not an accident. Destiny is an answer. Destiny is alignment. Destiny is hearing the question that haunts you and having the courage not to ignore it. Because this question doesn't go away. It returns when you try to sleep. It appears when you are alone. It manifests when something unexpected touches you inside. It resurfaces when you think you've already overcome it. Because it's not an ordinary question. It's the question of the spirit. It's the question of eternity. It's the question that reveals who you truly are and where you truly are inside. And perhaps that's why you're here right now, listening to this. Not because you stumbled upon this video by chance, not because the algorithm wanted it that way, not because you were bored, but because this question needed to find you. It needed to touch exactly the point you're trying to avoid, because there's something inside you that's already answering, even if you haven't admitted it yet. There's an echo inside, a silent voice that recognizes something has begun within me, something is changing, something has awakened. And that recognition is the beginning of everything. If you've made it this far, it's because something inside you has truly awakened. So now do this. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapter of this spiritual journey we're building together. Leave a like to strengthen this video and show the algorithm that this topic needs to reach more people. And comment below what caught your attention the most, what phrase, sign, or reflection touched you the most. I want to read everything.